we had. I'm going to make my joke again about a progressive event starting exactly on time. Hope everybody's very impressed with that. Thank you to everybody for coming tonight. We especially want to thank the Mennonites for hosting us. This is a great space. We really appreciate them putting us up here when we have our meetings. Of course, we want to thank our candidates for joining us tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. And thanks to all of you who chose to come and share pizza and political speech with us tonight. Before we get started, as I mentioned previously, we have food and drinks out there. Feel free to step out. You can cut through the little kitchen right there if you need to. We also have restrooms here. We have one down that hall, but then the easiest one to get to is right out here in kind of the main hallway behind that wall with the pictures on it. So please feel free at any point to do what you need to do. All right, so we're the Alachua County Labor Coalition. We're composed of individuals, unions, worker-friendly organizations committed to the economic, environmental, civil, and social rights of working people, their families and communities, and the ecological systems that sustain us. As a reminder, because sometimes people get us confused with other organizations in the community, we are a 501c4. We do not endorse candidates. We have strived to treat all candidates fairly throughout this entire process. Several weeks ago, the Labor Coalition sent out candidate questionnaires. Those responses in their entirety are posted on our website for anyone to see. We invited everyone who responded to our questionnaire to attend the forum. As you might imagine, especially with everything right now, we have a number of members who are not comfortable with in-person events right now. So we are also recording the event tonight. And like the previous forum we hosted a few weeks ago, we'll be posting the entirety of the event on our website. I do want to just mention quickly, if anybody would like to make a contribution to the Labor Coalition, we have a tip jar basically out there by the pizza and drinks if you want to drop a little cash in there. If you're high-tech and fancy, our new coordinator made these really cool QR codes. You can actually scan it with your phone and just make a donation to Labor Coalition. So Jen is going to pass that around to folks, and feel free to make use of that. All right, so the format for tonight. We're going to start off giving each candidate a minute just to introduce themselves and tell you who they are. We'll then ask them questions about issues of importance to our membership. Candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. We know that some of these are big questions, which is why we offered more space in our online questionnaire. But please, candidates, try to be succinct tonight. And Sheila, I believe you're going to be letting people know. So keep your eye, when she comes back, keep your eye on Sheila. She's going to be up here and give you the sign when you're kind of running out of time, basically. Lastly, we do invite audience members to submit questions to our moderator, Jen here. She'll be circulating around the room. She has note cards and pens, so if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please submit them to her, and we'll be kind of mixing in audience questions along with our questions that we have. Yeah, raise your hand to get Jen's attention, and she'll come to you. We're going to ask as many questions as time allows. Obviously, we want to keep folks here all night, but we want to get as good of a conversation going as we can. So we're going to try to get through some questions tonight. And lastly, I think most folks got an agenda when they came in. We do have some upcoming events that we really hope you'll join us for, including one this weekend. We're going to be celebrating, as we do most years, we're going to be celebrating Medicare and Medicaid's birthday. It's a big event in our nation's history and means an awful lot to a lot of people. So we're going to be celebrating that this coming Saturday at Cypress and Grove Brewery, complete with birthday cake. So please join us for that. Oh my gosh, I should know that. 57. There we go, 57, woo! The one thing I do want to mention about your agenda at the bottom there, we have a meeting for our housing committee coming up. That was going to be here in person, but we have changed that to online. So we'll be posting information about that on our website. But everything else on the agenda, the details there are accurate. So, all right, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic, and we will start off with Harvey Ward.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here this evening. There are lots and lots of other choices you could have made and spent your time being home and relaxing after a hard day's work probably, but I appreciate you being here so that you can make good informed decisions about how to vote for mayor. My name is Harvey Ward. I'm running for mayor of Gainesville. I've been a city commissioner for 2 terms now. I started in 2017. I've been here in Gainesville all my life. I'm a graduate of Eastside High School, Santa Fe College, and UF. I'm raising a family here in Gainesville, and I have a stake in Gainesville being a great place. I'm also caring for my elderly father here in Gainesville, so I kind of get both sides of the sandwich generation. I know what working families are up against in our community, and I do my best to keep that in mind with every decision that I make from the dais. I'm committed to a city where we connect to each other and to the world around us, where we commit to safe streets and clean, reliable energy, and where we go out of our way to work together to create peace of mind for every person and every working family who chooses to call this home. Thank you.
My name is July Thomas, and I'd like to spend the minute that I have here to talk about an issue in our community. Terrell Bradley was mauled by a GPD K-9 officer several weeks ago. His family is a family of police officers who are pro-police, but he was pulled over for rolling through a stop sign where there was no stop sign. He was hunted down for over an hour. He lost his right eye. Now his family, who by the way, his father is a reverend and was a GPD police officer in the 90s, have issued a series of very reasonable demands. They've asked for GPD to address its policy of pursuit to a suspect who is not a threat to the community. They've asked for the officer who initiated the stop to be, at minimum, punished, not necessarily fired. They've asked for the K-9 officer to be fired and for the dog to be permanently retired. And they've asked for body cam footage and dash cam footage, unedited, to be released. And I just want to echo those calls and bring it to y'all's attention. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is David Arreola. I was born and raised here in Gainesville when my parents immigrated from Mexico in 1987. Have really enjoyed seeing all the different versions of Gainesville, going from just a little kid at Baby Gator to now being a city commissioner. In my 5 years on the city commission, one of the, I would say, biggest accomplishments that I had was actually working with the Labor Coalition on the rental housing ordinance. I chaired the subcommittee working with members of the Labor Coalition. One of those members is now on the commission to really pass what has become the most progressive piece of rental housing legislation for municipal government in the southeastern United States. Other cities are now looking at this. Tampa City Council has asked to look at this, and that was made possible because of members here on the coalition. I enjoy working with people in the community to pass meaningful legislation. I also think we need to push the envelope on what we call meaningful legislation. We need to begin to take transformative steps that change the status quo here in Gainesville, because the status quo is not working for everybody.
Thank you. I'm Ed Bielarski. Haven't been born here in Gainesville. Actually made a choice to live here about 7 years ago. Came down to be the GRU general manager after, I think, a fairly successful history of working in industry where I took care of employees that worked under my supervision and management. Have a history of creating jobs within those industries, taking care of those folks that worked for me. When I managed a power facility up in a little place called Nesquehoning, Pennsylvania, I actually created a hourly employee bonus program for folks. They've got to participate in the rewards of the organization. Negotiated the first labor agreement that was signed by the Lehigh County Authority, merged 23 disparate municipal water utilities into one, saving, oh, gotta stop. I'd like to say more later.
Good evening. My name is Gary Gordon. I grew up here. I graduated from PK Young, went away to college at Emory and then Northwestern, went back to Atlanta and then came back here. And my activism in town, from being an anti-nuke activist to a safe energy activist, environmental activist in general, neighborhood activist, led to the City Commission, where I served from 1983 to 1986. I was mayor 85, 86, and I think one of my major accomplishments then was I led the effort to get the recycling program started. I'm running for this office now because I think I bring more experience to this job than any of my opponents, and I'll go into more detail when I have more time. Thank you.
So unfortunately, we're short of mic tonight, so we're going to be doing a lot of mic passing. So if you don't mind passing down here, I'll go ahead and read our first question, and then we'll start on. All right. So as you're aware, Gainesville has not been spared from the rising levels of economic inequality in our country since the late 70s. In fact, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, Alachua County has the highest level of income inequality in the state. Labor economists and scholars of inequality have consistently demonstrated that a unionized economy is one of the surest ways to lessen economic inequality. If workers in this community seek to organize a union in their workplace, regardless of the employer, will you stand with them and support them publicly? So that's a yes or no question, please. The second part, if no, why not? If yes, what can you and the city do to support workplace organizing campaigns? Please be as specific as possible in your answer. And we'll start with July on this one.
Yeah, so I'm a member of Graduate Assistants United. I've also spent some time encouraging others to start unions. Recently, the United Campus Workers Union, which represents essentially everyone who's not, an educator on campus, formed their union for the first time. That was a union that did not exist, that as of 4 or 5 months ago now exists. I've supported the formation of labor unions across the board. I believe in workers' rights, and I believe in collective bargaining as a method by which workers can reap the benefits of their labor. As a mayor, the things that I can do are obviously stand with people in this movement, continue to educate them on how to unionize, and continue to show examples from around our city and around the country where organized labor has permitted workers to gain more fruits from their labor. That's what I intend to do.
Thank you. Very good question. On the commission, I have supported raises for of all of our bargaining units in the 5 years that we've had different contracts. The city is mostly a unionized workforce, and I think that's how it should be for most of the city of Gainesville. I have publicly supported unionization campaigns. The Santa Fe Adjuncts campaign was one that I publicly supported, and I would be ready to support any campaigns brought forward on any company, particularly ones with our largest employers in the city of Gainesville. Now, I do think that we also have to have a commission that continues to be vocal on this issue. So as mayor, I would continue to promote for the largest employers to raise their wages up to what the city of Gainesville sets. The city of Gainesville pays everybody at least $15 an hour. Living wages are obviously changed based on the economy and based on inflation and things of that nature. So we do need to continue to raise our living wage at the city of Gainesville, and asking UF in particular and our larger employers to match that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the question is really, how do you support living wage? How do you support employees and them striving to be the best that they can be? And I have a long history of doing that, whether it's promoting folks from outside the organization, within the organization, to higher levels. I was one of the charter officers that implemented the Total Rewards program that really put some employees in a much better position. It recognized their talents. I have a history of doing that with other organizations. Now, in terms of promoting the union and the collective bargaining process, GRU and the city itself are covered by collective bargaining agreements, and it's a municipal corporation, so you have to be somewhat careful going out and promoting on one side when you represent the municipal corporation. So there's some legalities associated with that we have to really be careful with, and the key element is to get the employees in the best situation, and I have a long history of doing that. Thank you.
The answer to the first question is yes. That would be the one-word answer that you were looking for, and that's the one I can definitely give with confidence. I would have no problem as mayor in walking a picket line with people that were picketing. I've done that before. My wife is CWA for 20 years, AT&T out in California. And so when I lived there, I learned a whole lot more about unions than I had previously known. But when I served here, I was proud to have the endorsements of the firefighters and the police and the CWA here. And I got those in part because after I got elected the first time, I fulfilled my promises to those people. It was tricky because the negotiations about those contracts are one of the only secret meetings that the city holds. And I was tired, and they were tired, of being told by various politicians who had won that they would do this, that, and the other for them. And then the negotiations would be over, and the manager would say, here's this and that. And lo and behold, they didn't get what they thought they were going to get and what they'd been told they were going to get. So I threatened to make those meetings public. And what do you know, it turned around, and we were able to get CWA and the other workers for the city, especially the bus drivers, who were they were treated like dirt. We were able to get raises for all of them, and I was very proud of that. And I guess through myself and my own upbringing and my marriage with my wife, if I started to step out of line 1 second on any union issue, happy wife, happy life, I would never hear the end of it. So I'm fully committed.
So the answer to the question, of course, is yes. Those of you who know me, and that's most of you in this room, know that I've been not only committed, but on a day-to-day basis working directly with our bargaining units at the City of Gainesville. We couldn't get past a stalemate with CWA. I didn't just let the city management know that I was interested in moving forward. I went to the bargaining meeting. I showed up, and it's amazing how quickly having a commissioner show up at that meeting moves things along. Before long, we had an agreement. I have gone out of my way to when I had a question about a union matter, a bargaining unit question, I went to the leaders. I have gathered the bargaining unit leaders for meetings before when I felt like there was something specific going on that we needed to know about. An important distinction between an elected commissioner or mayor and management, one of the charter officers, is that we're elected to work for you all. We are not necessarily management of the city of Gainesville. We're the ones who make policy. We pass that policy on to management. So you don't stop representing the people in this room when you get elected to the city commission or to the office of mayor. That's important to keep in mind. I grew up in a CWA household. I live in a UFF household right now, and I'm committed to the labor movement. I showed up whenever people have asked me to be a part of a labor discussion. I was there when Casey Willits opened had the first press conference for the UF Employees Union. I will continue to be there for those. Elected or not, the union matters, and I will be there to support the union. The best thing that the city of Gainesville can do to support the union movement across our city is to make sure that we have strong bargaining units at the city of Gainesville because they represent more people than most of the unions in town do. So thank you.
All right, so folks have already heard reference to the rental housing ordinance campaign that the Labor Coalition worked on. Just a little background on that. What we advocated for was some of the policies we advocated for included a reduction in the cost of landlord licenses, universal inspection of all rental properties in the city to include enhanced energy and water efficiency standards as well as safety standards, stronger anti-discrimination protections in housing, improved communication requirements for landlords so their tenants know more about the properties, and a city-sponsored mediation program to help address the rampant rental deposit theft that's been taking place in this community for far too long. So that's the policy that we advocated for. My question is directly related to that. Some of you, as was mentioned, were actively involved in the passage of this rental housing ordinance. Some of you opposed it. At least one of you has publicly referred to this as, quote, the rental increase ordinance. What, if any, changes would you push for with regard to this ordinance? Please be specific. And we'll start with David.
Thank you. Well, when we passed the draft ordinance out of committee and brought it before the City Commission, I felt that we had a really strong product. We'd achieved a lot of the goals that we were aiming for. And with any transformative policy, you have to be open to feedback and you have to be open to looking at how you change things in the event that maybe some of our efforts were, not entirely calibrated well. So one of the things was the inspections. We outsourced inspections. We found out that was leading to a lot of delays, and we don't want to do that. We don't want this to be an ordinance that delays safe and affordable housing, but we decided to make that adjustment to bring that inspection in-house. I support the energy efficiency standards. I support the health and safety standards. I don't think it's burdensome for landlords to have to pay for an inspection once every 4 years for a rental housing property that they're asking people to live in and rather collecting money on. I've heard all of the threats from landlords from the very first moment we had the subcommittee meeting. We were threatened with increased rents. I don't know if that's why my rent went up, but I know that landlords have been raising rent way before we were passing this progressive policy. So I'm not fazed by it. I do think that we need to, this was one of the most transformational steps we've taken. I've heard some other ideas come from other candidates. I know Casey Willits has mentioned an idea of a notice being sent out for any increases prior to them being implemented. I think that's a good idea. I think we need to be open to good ideas for this ordinance, but we can't compromise the actual substance of it, which is safer housing, more affordable housing, and more energy efficient housing for rental units all throughout Gainesville.
Thank you. I think I might have been the culprit that talked about the rental increase ordinance because I've knocked on 12,000 doors throughout the community, and I've talked to folks that come from all lots of life and are in different kind of circumstances. There's a lot of landlords out there that have 1 or 2 dwellings that they rent out. I had a guy stop me on the street and say, "Look, I had to spend $4,000 to upgrade this unit to an efficiency standard that's higher than my own house." And he said, "I'm not going to cover that. That means that the rent that I collect will have to cover that additional expense." And that's, I think, what you see on the commission is they don't have this idea of revenue expense and the whole idea of profit. So it just ends up going into the renter's bill. And in a time when rents are going up all over, we have to be cognizant of that. There's some of these tenants that aren't asking for different things. I think that we certainly have to have safety and health associated with this. But the idea that we have out-of-state or out of the community inspectors coming in and willy-nilly coming up with these different types of inspections that are adding to the problem that we already have is, the best intentions don't always go so well. So I think what you need to do is focus on the bad actors. And I think the city has not done well in committing to those bad actors and really getting them out of the business or putting them out of business as opposed to the folks that are just trying to get by and get reliable and affordable housing.
Okay, we're supposed to be up here disagreeing with one another so that you can differentiate us from each other. But I've run into the exact same thing on the campaign trail that Ed ran into. And I know landlords who own 1 house or 2 houses or 1 duplex or 1 triplex who've had to put thousands and thousands of dollars into their place, even if they retrofitted it 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. I know that the inspectors that were used for a while were college students who weren't trained, and now that's been pulled. So there were out-of-town inspectors, that didn't work. There were college students, that didn't work. This kind of mandate from the city is what scares people about government. It makes them fearful, not in a good way at all, in a bad way. They look at the government and they say, hey, I'm just trying to do this and there's nothing wrong with it. And you guys, one minute you've got this kind of inspector, one minute you've got that kind of inspector. And it doesn't build confidence in the city or in the ordinance. If I'm elected, I want the ordinance reviewed. That doesn't mean undermined, sabotaged, changed, but reviewed. On top of that, to the extent that the energy efficiency standards are higher than anywhere else, it makes the housing potentially unaffordable, which means that it goes against, it's at cross purposes of the idea of making affordable housing. I know landlords who, small landlords again, because this only applies to small landlords. This is not the big landlords. This is the one or two houses or duplex or triplex. I know landlords who have lost longtime tenants because the cost of fixing their place up made it unaffordable for those tenants. And they had to leave, and they didn't like it, and these landlords didn't like it either. It's got to be at least reviewed with community-wide participation.
So I feel like not everybody has been paying attention not everybody who's running for mayor has been paying attention to what the city commission's actually been doing the last few months, because we did just review it, and that's when we made some of the changes that have been referred to. Gainesville's full of landlords. I mean, there are a lot of folks in this town who own one or two rental properties. They accumulate them over the years. What this, beg your pardon about? Sorry? It's fine. Okay. What's important is that we focus on what we're trying to accomplish here, which is consumer protection. That's what this is at its heart. There are a lot of folks who are renters in our community who either have a lawyer, are a lawyer, can afford a lawyer, mom and daddy can afford a lawyer, whatever. But there are also a whole lot of renters in our community who don't understand how to read a lease, who can't figure out why things are so expensive, who don't know that it's okay to not only ask, but demand that you have a decent place to live for the money that you pay for it. And that's our job. The city commission is supposed to be there to represent those folks and make sure that they have a decent place to live. Now, when we passed the renters' rights ordinance, it was not perfect. It's still not perfect. It should be a practice of continuous improvement to get to something that is better all the time. We should hear from the community, both landlords and tenants, to make that better. But let me tell you something. The people that we most need to protect in this process, they don't come to city commission meetings. They don't understand how to read their leases. They're the folks we have to watch out for. And we can talk about protecting landlords all day long. It doesn't help those folks. And that's what I try to keep in mind consistently. Thank you.
I feel like everyone else up here is kind of dancing around the core of this issue. The issue here is landlords. I don't know why we're not willing to acknowledge the fact that landlords do not do labor. Simply, they take money away from the working class through passive income. And when we look at this specific ordinance that they're talking about, which is the renters' right ordinance, I actually did get into it with Jeremiah Tattersall over this because I did oppose it. And I opposed it for a simple reason, which is that over the last 10 years, there's been a consolidation of rental properties in this city. There are a few large landlords who collect the properties of smaller slumlords when they get out of the business, and those landlords are worse than the small-time landlords. But the issue is that the small-time landlords have no interest in selling to the single families who would like to live in those homes because they can make more by bundling the properties together and selling them to the larger landlords. And then you have people like Alligator Realty who are unresponsive and do not do the repairs that they should be doing. And it doesn't matter what ordinance you've implemented, because at the end of the day, the landlord who is collecting the properties is shitty at the job. We need to take steps to decommodify housing. We need to take homes. We're going to have rental properties because we have a college in the city, but we need to figure out a way for those folks who do want to live here, who want a home, We need to figure out a way to get us into these rental properties, take them off the rental market. Now you have people living in a home who care about the home, who are going to put the work into it to keep it up and ensure that it can be passed on to future generations.
Jen, did you want to do this audience question now? Okay, it's up to you. You want to wait or you want to do it now? Okay, all right. So, well then here, hold on to it and let me know when you're ready. All right, next question. In your questionnaire responses, many of you pointed out that a living wage consists of more than a worker's hourly pay rate. Specifically, many of you noted that benefits such as health coverage is an important component of a living wage. While the city has set a good example for other employers in the community by increasing the minimum hourly pay of its employees, many full-time, temp, and part-time city employees are unable to afford health insurance for their spouses, children, and other dependents. This question has two parts. First, as mayor, would you support offering affordable health insurance for dependents of full-time, temp, and part-time city workers? Secondly, how would you accomplish this specifically? And this will start with Ed.
Pass the wand now. Yeah, during my time in service at the utility, every year the health costs moved up. And so people would get raises, they get the total rewards, but it was prohibitive for them to handle that. So, you know, what I've talked about on the campaign trail has been this whole concept of affordable living. We keep compartmentalizing all this stuff. It's like we look at each one of the issues and think it's just unto itself. You know, so we talk about landlords and rent, and then we talk about health, and health insurance, and then we talk about some of these other things. It's about the holistic approach to making Gainesville affordable for everyone. So what I've talked about has been the fact that the city commission asks you all to tighten your belt, but they don't tighten theirs. So you can't have a city commission whose budget has went from $105 million to $155 million over 7 years, or taking more money from the utility than they actually earn, because that means utility bills go up. That means that they don't have any money to do any of the programs that they're talking about. They're going to have to take less in a general fund transfer, so they're sitting here talking to you about all the things that they can do, but they can't do it. They won't balance their budget, so it forces you to stop or make choices between medicine and paying your utility bill. Have you all seen the utility bill? Okay? This past, how much time do I have? 13 seconds. People got bills for a period of 35 billing days. That means in the hottest part of the month or the year, you got bills that you can't afford because natural gas went up on top of having a structural financial deficiency that exists at the utility. That has to be addressed.
Ed just touched on something that I want to expand on. The utility budget is a very difficult animal, and the debt makes it even tougher. And discussions about the transfer are all over the place as to whether or not it should be maintained, reduced, or eliminated. Eliminating it would put the city budget in turmoil. Now, the city budget finances are also a mess, if you're familiar with the external audit. They're not even sure what they've got. They think they've got, they read something on paper, they think they've got it. So I have been reluctant as a candidate, even though almost every questionnaire I get either directly asks for money for the organization or the cause or implicitly asks. I've been reluctant as a candidate to make any kind of promise that says, yes, the city will pay for that. Yes, the city will do that. Yes, the city will fund that. Because the city has to figure out, and I've had a couple of conversations already with with the city manager about this, figure out what kind of money it's got. Now, I proposed a citizen budget review that if I'm elected and the commissioners go along with it, this would take effect right away. It would involve at least 40 stakeholders throughout the community, maybe more, regular meetings of that group with department heads to go through each and every department budget and figure out not what can be added to the budget, but what can be cut. Involve citizens in deciding where the cuts should be, because there will need to be some cuts, especially if people continue to increase demands for what they want. It's a tough act. It's a lot different than just either running a business, even though that's tough, or running a department. Running a city, in part, is balancing all of these different interests, and that's where I have the background.
I feel like the question was about whether or not we'd pay for health insurance for contract workers. Is that accurate? Okay. Because that's not the questions we just heard answered. And that's cool. Everybody gets to use their time for whatever they want. Yes, we absolutely should do that. We have moved toward that over the last couple of years. And as much as some folks want to talk about, oh, the general government budget's gotten huge, the general government budget got bigger over the last few years because we got serious about paying our workers what they were worth. The city of Gainesville had been holding back on paying our workers reasonable wages. For years, we promised, before I got on the commission, that we would not only pay living wage and benefits to city workers, but also contract workers. We were never able to get that agreed to until about, let's see, it was this year's budget, I think, this current year's budget, where we agreed to start catching up contract workers to a living wage and urging folks that we contracted with to provide health insurance as well. One of the reasons we were unable to do that is we couldn't get straight answers from our former charter officers. When we asked how much it would cost, we never got a real number, so we said we're going to do it anyway. The truth is, the numbers of the city's finances are essentially correct. There are some questions, and we're in the process of getting those questions answered. We've hired the right people to do so, and it's important that you know that. We need to do a much better job at the city of Gainesville of our health insurance for our workers. When we catch that up, as will be a priority for me going forward, I've already spoken with the city manager about it and the new general manager. We need to find a way to try to expand that and offer it to people who are not just city workers and their families. There are ways to make the community a part of this. We just haven't investigated those as well as we need to. That's what I'm working on. Thanks.
Healthcare is a human right. It shouldn't be tied to employment, but we've agreed that we're going to live under capitalism, right? As a result of agreeing that we're not going to do anything about the capitalist system, we have to keep running the city like a business. And if we're going to keep running the city like a business, then we have to make sure that the books are balanced. You can't have both of them. We need to provide health care to people within the city because we do not have expanded Medicaid coverage because we live in a red state. There's nothing we can do about that. What we can do something about is our abysmal grant funding. The University of Florida is primarily a grant-supported institution. Professors' jobs generally is to get grants. Usually it's the grad students who are doing most of the labor, right? So we have this entire workforce who have supported what is effectively a business within the city, and we have not tapped into them at the city. New York City, I know it's New York City, but about 30% of their budget last year came from grant funding. Locally, we were budgeted at 2%, and we had a massive shortfall. It was budgeted at like 10 million, only 2 million came in. Maybe someone else can tell us what happened. That's part of the reason why they had to go and raid the pension funds last year, but I digress. The point here is that we have people in this city who care about the city who have experience writing grants. And if we have somebody who can mobilize them and plug them in with our full-time staff at the city, we can start to write grants to bring in income that we can utilize at the city that will not require us to continue to take out debt on GRU.
So I want to run back the tape on the total rewards discussion that started about 4 years ago, we did receive a report based on what we needed for raises to get everyone to median income in their category. And we did not receive a price tag on the healthcare. The management at the time told us, let's implement the raises first, and then we'll revisit healthcare. Well, management changed. And then management changed again. So now we have a new city manager who is going to bring that back. That will be a major decision the next city commission has to make. The next mayor will have to be a leader on this issue because we do have to make healthcare more affordable for our employees. A lot of our bargaining units have brought this up as a major issue for them. I do agree that healthcare is a human right. And an idea that I want to work on as mayor. I want to give credit to our former chief medical advisor during the pandemic, Dr. Lisa Chaco. She once pitched to me the idea of having a pool of healthcare that is shared among the major public institutions that you can then offer to businesses to buy into as well, so that there is a large enough risk pool, because it's all about, for these health insurance companies, it's all about the risk pool for them. You have enough people in this risk pool that you can afford to sell the same health insurance that any employee in the city of Gainesville is offered to anybody in Gainesville, whether you work for the city of Gainesville or not. And I think that's an idea worth pursuing. But obviously, the mayor cannot work alone. The mayor needs to get things done with the city commission. And I would work with the next city commission to pursue that idea. And since we're talking about the budget, I have a little bit more time. I will point out that the city commission is not raising taxes this year, and we did see an expectation of about $4.7 million extra coming in, and that's also with the reduction of the general fund transfer. That's just a little microcosm of how fast and how large Gainesville is growing.
Okay. Too many people are sent to jail for minor offenses, such as nonviolent and non-threatening trespassing, holding small quantities of illicit drugs, and resisting arrest without violence. And they have to remain incarcerated because they can't make bail. Many of these individuals later see these charges dropped, whether because they are innocent or because the issue is better dealt with through diversion. The time these individuals spend in jail is traumatic and can severely inhibit their ability to maintain their jobs and quality of life. How can the city ensure that police officers who routinely arrest individuals for offenses better dealt with through sworn complaints or citations either change this behavior or are taken off the streets? Would you direct the city manager to keep track of data on those officers who use arrest rather than citations and diversion opportunities? And we'll start with Gary down in the end there.
Well, the short answer is yes. I mean, it's only a matter of justice. The larger answer is to have a good discussion about the police department and what the expectations are of the police department and the changes that need to be made in the police department and the kind of training and especially the pay. Because the information I have, and I'm not the only one to say this, is we end up training people to be police officers, and then they leave to better paying jobs at other police departments elsewhere. So, you know, that's a budget issue, though. You got to be able to afford to pay people what they're worth and retain them, especially if you train them. And if you train them, you have to train them so they do what you want them to do. Now, the form of government that we have is the commission makes the policy, tells the manager to implement it. The manager tells the police chief, do this, and the police chief either does it or doesn't. Now, if the police chief doesn't do it, then the commission says to the manager, hey, it's not happening. If the manager doesn't do it long enough, then the commission says to the manager, you're out of here. I mean, it was referred to earlier about the budget. There was one manager, and this didn't get done, and then there was another manager. Well, those were bad hires. They were bad hires on the part of some of the people that are sitting up here. And now we've got a good person as an interim manager, and everybody's pretty keen on her staying on, and she may become manager before any of us are elected mayor. So that, I think that would be a good thing. But that's the way it works. The commission or a mayor cannot tell a police chief do this or do that. The police chief that just, okay, I just got the stop signal.
We try. We try.
Thank you. So I want to say, first of all, that yes, I'm one of those people who would really like to make our interim city manager as soon as Thursday, if it were specifically up to me. I'm very pleased with the work that the city of Gainesville is receiving from Ms. Curry. There are a lot of things that we can do that we are in the process of doing, have been working on for years, that are about to start showing some real fruit in this community about policing. We've funded with the county and with the state a central receiving facility. And what that is an opportunity. Let me back up a little bit. There are a lot of people sitting out on 39th Avenue right now who got arrested because they had a bad day. Something went wrong. They had a mental health issue. They just had a bad day. Something happened that put them in the wrong position at the wrong time. The central receiving facility is an opportunity for when someone is arrested or taken away from the scene, instead of taking them to jail to be booked, you can take them to a central receiving facility, and we call it central because it's for the city of Gainesville, UF, the county, and some surrounding counties who will help fund it as well, where they can, in some cases, just sleep off whatever the problem is, and then it can be reassessed the next day. That's a huge piece that we've been working on for a long time, and it's finally coming to fruition. Mental health support for GPD officers, to go along with GPD officers, is something we've been working along with Meridian for a good long while. It's coming to fruition. It is something that works. It is very functional. When you do a ride along with GPD, what you learn is that the vast majority of calls are either mental health issues or social service issues. They're not a situation where there's a good guy and a bad guy and the cop is there to support the good guy. That's not what it is. You show up, it's mom doesn't know what to do with the teenager who's having a bad day, so they call the police. And when that mental health professional is able to go along, you get much better results. We're making that better. There's some very good things that are in process. We need to do better, and we will.
I guess y'all haven't heard the same stories I have about the interim city manager, but it doesn't surprise me to hear you don't talk to your workers. I mean, you got a reputation, Harvey. The question was about the police, and specifically about detention rates within the city. We have historically, and we still do, have the largest incarceration rate for black minors in the state as a county. It's an issue. Even if you have a nonviolent police force, they're still going to take people to jail, and they're going to leave people in jail, especially if you have a cash bail system that's been implemented. Our police budget is the largest sector of the budget. You might like this, Ed. It's equal to the general fund transfer, roughly. We need to scale our police department back. We need to reevaluate the things that we are calling them to. They do not need to handle everything. They do not prevent crime. They're largely there to protect property. They show up after the bullets have already flown. We need to implement different forms of interaction between the city and the people that we serve. You wouldn't call the police to put out a fire. There are other services that police should not be doing as well. I'm not going to say what they all are. I think it's a conversation that should be had, and I'm not going to do anything unilaterally. People have to come along with it. But that is a conversation that should be had, that should have started many years ago, but that I will make sure is something that we continue to address.
GPD has had a serious issue over its long history of disproportionate contact with minority men, particularly. And so this has been, for Chief Jones, almost his entire career, he has been working to try and reverse that trend. It's going to take a lot of work. The City Commission doesn't have a direct line to give orders to GPD. The charter has a firewall that says very specifically, we cannot even direct the manager to give the police directions. We have ran up against that so many times when we were trying to pass the community ID program to direct GPD to have to accept community IDs from our immigrant neighbors or anybody who had these IDs. and the management and GPD were pushing back, saying the commission cannot give us this direction. They have to do things at their own pace, which is very frustrating for me. But we have seen progress in some of the programs that we've pursued. The central receiving facility is going to happen. We have already signed a memorandum of understanding with the state attorney, who's a fairly conservative fellow, but he's been willing to sign this agreement to allow for pre-arrest diversion, adult civil citations, and we have asked our manager whether or not it gets enforced is, of course, up to the individual officers, which we do keep that data. The original part of the question was, are we going to keep data on how officers respond, and that data is kept. But we've asked them to not prioritize victimless misdemeanors and other low-level petty crimes. So it is something that requires constant vigilance from people. I don't think that it is solely upon the responsibility of people to do that. I think elected officials do have a responsibility to step in, even if there is a firewall. And I've been willing to do that for people in Gainesville as a commissioner, and I'll continue to do that as mayor.
I'll answer this question directly, and it will please Commissioner Ward. I do agree that we ought to keep track of officers. I mean, it's part of the whole process that you evaluate people as to whether there's a disproportionate amount of folks that are from the minority community that are being targeted. That is absolutely not the way to go. I actually agree with a little bit of what everyone said up here. It really does start with mental health issues. There's so much that is within our community that is associated with people's well-being mentally that puts them into these situations in which they act out, make bad decisions, do all kinds of things, and then all of a sudden they're in the lockup, they have a criminal record, and what do you do with that then? You're down a path that you're emotionally unstable with to begin with, and how do you get yourself out of it? And you have somebody that is probably incredibly valuable to the community that has made a misstep. So, I mean, from the point in which there's interaction with the police to the point where there's incarceration, I mean, there's a lot of dysfunction that exists there. It doesn't mean that we can't retrofit, reinvent the culture that exists within the police department. I think it really needs to be in a lot of different ways. But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater either. So, yes, you got to keep track of officers with the data. I think we need a culture change. And I agree with folks that said that Tony Jones was instrumental in getting us the community policing that is so important to Gainesville. We have a lot of good elements. We just have to put it together. Thank you.
I have a question, real quick. Is the central receiving facility going to be run by cops?
Yes. One way or another.
It's jail 2. It's the sequel.
Can I?
That is not accurate. That's okay.
All right. UF and Santa Fe College continue to physically grow and require more land to meet their future objectives. What has not grown, unfortunately, is their empathy for their employees and neighbors. For this next question, we'd like to know what sort of levers the city can use. For instance, refusing to sell city-owned land, refusing to agree to land use changes, or others, unless and until UF and Santa Fe College agree to grant concessions to improve the quality of life for their workers and neighbors, such as paying their workers a living wage, stopping union busting, voluntarily remitting payments in lieu of taxes. Please be specific in your answer. And for this one, we'll start with you, Harvey.
Thank you. There's a whole lot that we can do in this room and sound really good, and there's a lot less that we can do in the real world. Some things we can do, and I will tell you that some of the things that we've come to accept in our community, like the fact that everybody loves Santa Fe, are probably going to change a little bit now that Santa Fe has a large presence downtown. and is actually going to have to participate in the life of the community as more than just a very nice educational institution just outside the city of Gainesville. So it's going to be interesting when, just in a couple of weeks, when Santa Fe students start parking in neighborhoods and become a part of the life of the community. It's going to be a different sort of thing. Santa Fe College and the University of Florida work directly for the governor and the legislature. They can put a wall up around themselves and have nothing to do with the city of Gainesville if they choose. That's a sad reality. There are a few things that we can do that we have not done, like refuse to provide police services at Shan's emergency room and support like that, which we have consistently done unpaid. There are things like that that we can bring to bear. We can also make sure that our city commission and mayor are a consistent presence in front of decision makers, that we show up at things like the Board of Trustees or governors, always forget which one it is. They meet quarterly. It's very rare that one of our elected officials shows up. I've done it several times. I've been there with Paul Ortiz and some other folks to ask for very specific things. I don't have a problem with calling those folks out. I've done it. I'm on record as doing it. There's not a lot of them asking us what they can do, because they work for the legislature and for the governor, and we need to be aware of that and work with them as best we can, but admonish them very publicly when they're not doing the right thing, like not paying their workers enough. And that's something that we need to continue to call them out on.
I would contend that UF cannot fully meet its own needs, which is why it continues to take resources out of our community, particularly through the acquisition of land that has taken off property tax rolls, which decreases the county and city's property tax rolls. I did the math one time. If UF were paying property taxes on all the land that it owes, it would increase Alachua County's property tax roll by 40%. That's how valuable the land is that UF is sitting on. And as they buy more land, that land goes off the rolls. And there's so much we can do about that. But one thing that we can do is address something like Innovation Square, where we had city-owned land that was just given to the university. And the model for Innovation Square came from Arizona State University. And the idea was, in order to make up for a state government which was decreasing funding, you'll create this off-campus little hub where they'll just churn out patents, and then the university will get to keep the patents, and that will be a money-generating model. Somehow the city got pulled into that and got absolutely nothing out of it. We actually gave land away. We can look at the way that we interact with the university as a negotiation. If we're going to insist on running the city like a business, then we should be entering into these conversations as negotiations and understanding that UF is not going to move away. It would be tremendous cost for them to pack up their campus and move away. Okay, we have leverage there. And we also have people within the university who do care about the city and care about the well-being of the city. So it's not like we have to just go in there and strong-arm them the whole way. There are people within that university who have an interest in real estate development, and real estate development that is controlled by hedge funds and billionaires who are their friends, or in some cases actually sitting on that board of trustees themselves. And those people, you have to sort of come in there a bit stronger, but we have to be willing to negotiate. That's my point.
Thank you. So there are very few instances where the UF and the city legally have to come to the table. One of those instances is every so often there has to be an agreement signed for resources that the city is paying. Someone's mentioned in terms of utility services, police, fire, you name it. RTS is one of the big ones. Almost always the university chooses to pass on any increase in those costs directly to their students, directly to their employees. However, there is a process that they have to go through to get that agreement signed. I was one of the commissioners willing to hold up that process because we had students and community members coming to us and telling us that the university was having absolutely nothing to do with them in terms of planning for affordable housing, because the university is tearing down affordable housing currently. So we held up that plan until university administrators actually came to a city commission meeting and showed us what they were going to do to help folks find new housing because they were going to be tearing their housing down. That is one of the few instances where I can think of where the university was legally forced to come to the table. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of recourse because if we had decided not to sign that agreement, the agreement would have been decided by the Department of Economic Opportunity, which is under Governor Ron DeSantis, our statewide fascist. So we need to also understand that UF is not a monolith. There are colleges in UF that want to do good work within the community. The College of Arts and Medicine wanted to turn the old fire station into a community center that would be specifically for the Porter's Quarters neighborhood and also university students. The College of Medicine wants to help expand the UF clinic on the east side so that they can have more classroom space there, help with economic development, but also offer much needed medical access to medical services to the east side zip codes. The Office of Sustainability wants to work with the city of Gainesville in implementing our zero waste ordinance, which is going to reduce single-use plastic waste in the city.
You were on a roll, too. Sorry about that. Yeah, you know, I can only judge University of Florida by the experiences that I had with them. When I first came on board in 2015, one of the things I saw as an opportunity was to fill the donut hole that existed with our territory at GRU. You know, think of us as the luscious outside is the GRU territory. On the inside is the hole that existed on campus. And I went to Charlie Lane and other officials there at University of Florida with, hey, we could get into this agreement. We can modify the tie line and take our transmission lines right into your community. And we can charge you less than what you're getting charged by Duke. You can make a savings. We can make a savings. Virtual win-win. Nada, nothing, zilch. Didn't want to do anything. In fact, he came back to me and he said, you know, Ed, we're really utility agnostic. We really, what's the least amount we could do for the biggest impact? It's like, really? That's what you want to do? And so that's what you're dealing with over there. So, you know, what folks have said up here is absolutely true. You know, how do you get leverage over that situation? And frankly, I don't think we've been as ingenious as we might be, because I think there are avenues where UF cares about how it looks. I mean, Gary's sitting next to me, you know, he probably was involved in some of the sit-ins, you know, early on in our life, right, with some of that stuff. They want you to love Gator Nation, but Gator Nation doesn't love you. And it's about time they paid attention to the city and our resources, what our people need. And I think we have to put that front and center. Come on, man. You're part of Gainesville. Let's go. We'll support you. But boy, wouldn't it be cool if we had the stadium half filled when you play Bama? And they go, oh. And then we made it a national issue. This place doesn't support us. So I have to stop.
I think it was more than one sit-in. When I was a kid growing up here, my dad was a university professor, and I thought of the university as an institution of higher learning. When I served on the commission in the early 80s, I realized that it was a corporation. Now, there's been some things said tonight about how the city is a business. The city is not a business. It's a service industry. It exists to work for you, to serve you. It's not supposed to be run like a business. It needs to watch the bottom line. There needs to be zero-based budgeting. I think the budget should be every year instead of every 2 years. But on the topic of the university, when I first moved back to town, I called Commissioner Harvey Budd because I was amazed at how much property the university had all over town. I said, how much are you losing in tax dollars? He said, I don't know. I said, does the city know? He said, no, we don't know. How do you find out? He said, you'd have to go down to the tax appraiser and look at every single parcel to figure out what it would be. Maybe July did that. I'm not sure. So congratulations for your enterprise on that. But it's apparent, even if you hadn't racked up those particular numbers, that the city's lost a boatload of tax dollars to the university. Now, what's the lever? Ed kind of referred to it. The lever is sort of moral suasion. They want to be the top 5 in the top 5 universities of the country. Well, Paul Ortiz and others will tell you they don't come close to that when it comes to their labor force. They don't come close to that in a whole lot of areas, and they don't come close to that in dealing with the city of Gainesville. But Charles Lane not only has a plan for the university, he has a plan for the entire city. And many people have seen it in City Hall and elsewhere in terms of what the university has in mind for the entire city. And that's dangerous. I got to stop. I'll leave you on that cliffhanger.
And it includes density.
So one of the questions on our questionnaire talked about the possibility of a general obligation bond for affordable and workforce housing. Some of you supported the idea, some of you opposed it, and others were uncertain. A common thread among those of you who are in opposition or uncertain is the lack of a plan for how the money would be spent. As mayor, you'll be responsible for helping to set the city commission's agenda and would therefore have an opportunity to guide a plan for spending bond monies. How would you propose bond money be spent? Or alternatively, what would you do to increase the number of affordable and workforce housing units in lieu of a bond? We'll start with July.
Yeah, so I know others have mentioned the bond issue. I brought it up a few months ago. I'm not sure if I was the first one to bring it up, but the way that I became aware of this idea is Midtown Apartments. It's a new development on First Ave, right behind the bars there, was funded with municipal bonds by the St. Augustine Parish, the Catholic Church there, who had owned it when it was a parking lot. And that project, of course, very famously ran into a whole bunch of snags. It was a luxury student housing development, and it opened with massive vacancy. I reviewed the energy curves from GRU to try to get an idea of what true vacancy rates are for these places, and that one is a tremendous outlier, where a majority of the units were actually pulling 0 kilowatt hours through the first 2 years of its existence. So there's huge issues there. Now, I'm not saying the city's going to run into that, but the one thing about issuing a bond is that that's a debt that has to be repaid with interest. And if we're not addressing our other budgeting issues, we're just going to end up kicking this can further down the road. And this is just something that has been done over and over. And the Poe et al. Have kicked the can once more, and whoever comes in is going to have to fix that issue. I will again go back to grant-based funding as a model. You do not have to repay grants. There's a ton available. The Biden administration just released a slew of funding. I can't remember the total, but I believe it's somewhere north of $100 billion. There's a ton of funding available, and we are leaving that money on the table because we're not adequately tracking these bonds, the grants that are available. So that will be primary for me. And then we also need to look at ways to use the existing built assets that exist. If you renew and refurbish your existing built assets, it keeps costs way down, and it's one of the only ways you can actually directly construct affordable housing where there was not housing before.
Earlier this afternoon, we had the discussion and the vote to put the bond on the ballot on November failed 2 to, I believe it was 5 or 2 to 4. I'm not sure who left the room. I'll let Commissioner Ward explain his viewpoint on the issue. But I was in favor of it because we have a serious housing crisis, and voters have almost overwhelmingly supported the idea of revenue for housing. The Wild Spaces Public Places Infrastructure Surtax that is going to be on the ballot this November also includes a housing component, and that is one of the highest polling aspects of that tax. So we had a plan. There was going to be 75% public-private partnership, 5% for assisting in home ownership, 5% for rehabilitation of current homes. We were going to have an oversight committee, much like Wild Spaces Public Places, but I understand if folks felt like this was moving very quickly, especially with another tax going to be on the ballot. Now, one of the good news is, in that discussion, Mayor Poe announced that he would be willing to campaign for this issue as soon as he is out of office to implement it in 2024. If I'm mayor, I will be pursuing that as well. Whoever becomes mayor, if it isn't me, I would ask that they pursue it as well, because even though we're putting $8 million towards affordable housing units with our American Rescue Plan dollars, that is going to amount to about 200 units. We have 16,000 cost-burdened households who are paying more than 30% of their income for their housing. It's a drop in the bucket. We need serious resources. We need a housing bond. We need that $50 million. We could affect up to 2,000 potential units. Now, I will also say, before the end of my term, I am going to vote to end exclusionary zoning, which makes it difficult to build smaller scales of housing throughout the city that's more affordable. And I'm going to vote to pass inclusionary zoning, which mandates that every new development that gets built in this city, there has to be affordable housing included in those developments, and it has to be that way permanently. The city can guarantee that.
So public opinion won't dissuade, I guess, Commissioner Arreola. The public has said they don't want you to vote that way, but you will vote that way. That's fine. You say it over and over again. So the idea, this is a very complex subject and probably way above a lot of the commissioners as well as myself. And I know that I don't know all the answers. We live in a macrocosm. We live in a capitalistic society, and we have a market. We're in the midst of a market bubble right now. As much as we want to change that market bubble, when we think we can change this world here in Gainesville, the chances are we're probably going to do the wrong thing. And we have a history of doing that in this community. We want to get to 100% renewable. Boom, yep, let's build a biomass plant. Let's do that. Let's do the solar feed-in tariff. We're smarter than everybody here in Gainesville. We can do it all. Well, we can't. And what we keep doing is making these generational decisions that affect us forever. We're dealing with utility costs that are higher right now, largely because of the biomass plant that we had to buy out and had to incur the debt and the interest all these years. That changed the structural finances of the city and the utility. So we can't beat the market here, folks. When you talk about grants, grants go to a certain level, and then you still have the operating costs that go on and go on and go on. And I've seen that with the city. They get grants for cops. They do this, they do that. And then when that grant has run out, you're left with a budget deficiency, and you go from a budget of $105 million to $155 million. Well, what do we do? Well, let's get more grants. How about we try to build an industrious city? Why don't we try to get job opportunities? Why don't we get skills training? And why don't we end the disparity in our educational system so people can get good jobs? I would think this organization would be looking for something like that, not more federal money, more state money. How about bringing in somebody that actually creates jobs?
I'm the only candidate other than Commissioners Ward and Arreola that was at the affordable housing presentation this afternoon. The bond went down 5-2. And it went down not because people were ideologically opposed to the bond, although some people are opposed to that kind of funding because it is a flat tax on everyone. It went down because the infrastructure to do the work to convince people to vote for it, and then the infrastructure, should it pass, to do something with the money on a timely basis, doesn't exist. They just brought on a new director of housing and community development. He did a fine job doing the presentation, but the city just isn't set up. Plus, there are millions and millions of dollars beyond that $8 million of ARPA funding. There's the $8 million that Seminary Lane supposedly has for affordable housing. There's care funding, there's SHIPS funding, there's CRA funding. And if you pooled some of that with the county, one commissioner estimated that you've probably got around $70 million in order to do affordable housing. What you don't have is the infrastructure of people to work on projects to spend the money. Now, what you also have is a city commission that has spent the last 4 years deciding that the solution to affordable housing is to eliminate single-family zoning. They have wasted 4 years on that cockeyed, dangerous idea, instead of saying to staff, put something together like this, which is what they finally got today, Affordable City Funding and Affordable Housing Program. This is close. This is real close. And it doesn't, although the bond is in here, most of what's in here didn't include the bond and doesn't need to include the bond. Stop.
Oh, he wouldn't give it to me.
So there's a whole lot to catch up on there, and I'm going to miss a lot of it. But this afternoon we did at the commission, at the general policy meeting, we did get a proposal for spending $8 million of federal money, which, let me just say, the American Rescue Plan has been a huge deal for the city of Gainesville and for every community in America. It's like $1.9 trillion overall. It's already affecting people's lives for the positive in this community with the funding that we got. So our $8 million that we set aside for housing, today we approved a plan to move forward with that. My hope for that is that not only does it help house people, but that we use it to build out a housing department and make proof of concept that we can then carry to the rest of the community and say, hey, look at the work we were able to do with this. How about we use this as proof of concept for a housing bond? I'm not opposed ideologically to a housing bond. I just don't want to put it on the ballot without actually talking to people about what we could actually do with it and how we would take care of it, how we would make sure that it got spent correctly. Our community has a tremendous tradition. Y'all okay down there? Okay. We have a tremendous tradition with wild spaces, public places, with the 1 mil, with some other items of passing unusual tax issues on ourselves. We're okay with doing that if we make a good case for it. But if we put it on the ballot without detail about how we're going to account for it, we should not expect that it will pass. My hope as mayor is that we will use this $8 million plan that we passed today as not only a great way to get people housed, but also as proof of concept for what we can do to be able in 2024 to go back to the voters and say, this is what the city of Gainesville is capable of with housing, and we'd like you to give us some more opportunity to do it. Thank you.
Sorry.
I
Start with you?
Yeah, Joy started,
My
yeah.
mistake. Losing track up here. It's getting late. All right. So I'm going to, we've got some questions about GRU. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. The first one is very straightforward. Do you have any interest or intent in selling GRU to FPL, Duke, or any other private company? Pretty simple, straightforward, yes or no question. Second part of this, GRU bills continue to be unaffordable for many people in our community. How would you work with GRU to bring down costs while maintaining the services and jobs the general fund transfer provides? If you are proposing a reduction in the general funds transfer, please be specific by how much and what exactly city services you would cut to make up for that reduction. And we're going to start with David on this one.
Thank you. So no, I will not sell any part of GRU to private interests. It is one of the greatest assets we have as a city. I do not believe that the private industry would take better care of our power grid or our water system. In fact, we've seen that they often do the opposite. So secondly, we do have to reduce the general fund transfer. I, 2 years ago, voted on a resolution for a 6-year plan. We are now in year 2 of that 6-year plan. So I am committing for my first term as mayor for 4 years to continue to follow that. That includes a $2 million reduction of the general fund transfer every year. That compounds to equal $42 million in reductions at the end of the 6-year reduction. And the general fund transfer will be down to about $23 million, which is the lowest it will have been in about 20 years or longer. I'm committed to that. Now, the question is, of course, how do you balance that? I mentioned earlier how without raising taxes, Gainesville is going to pull in $4.7 million more in property tax revenue than we were expecting to bring in. One of the consequences, it's a pro and con for population growth. Yes, we have more people living here. Yes, we have more people contributing to the tax base, but we also have a lot more challenges. And one of those challenges is housing affordability right now. In the long term, I want to get GRU off of fossil fuels. This is the last decade we have to mitigate climate catastrophe, and we have to take that seriously. If we don't get off of fossil fuels, we're going to regret it. That's what's driving the high cost of bills right now. Natural gas is 3 times more expensive now than it was at the beginning of the year. Some of that does have to do with the invasion of Ukraine. Some of that has to do with the fact that governments around the world have been subsidizing fracking for years, and we're now seeing the true cost of it. So renewable energy is more efficient. It is more cost effective than it has ever been. The biomass plant everyone talks about is currently our cheapest energy generation facility.
Yeah, I would not want to sell GRU. I think it's a very viable asset. It would take a referendum to do it as well. So it's not something that the mayor and commission would be able to do. Bring down the costs. What we need to do is get relief now. GRU has an $80 million rate stabilization fund. Built up $80 million by the time I'd left. That's something you could use now to reduce funds or reduce the rates. The other thing you can do is reallocate some of the American Rescue Plan money. You can do that. The other thing is what David suggested. I agree with him. You know, bringing down the transfer is appropriate, but it needs to be now. He's talking about $42 million worth of relief. Well, that means that GRU will have borrowed another $60 million because it doesn't solve the problem. Every year, GRU borrows money or draws on its reserves to pay the general fund transfer. Over the past 4 audited years, GRU has on average made $20 million. On average, they've paid close to $38 million in a general fund transfer. Can any of you do that? I can't do that. If I'm making $20,000 a year, I can't pay $38 to anybody. You know how many businesses do that? Pay a dividend higher than what they earn? Nobody that wants to be sustainable. Nobody that wants that to continue. You can't continue to do that. And it's right under all the commissioners' noses. They don't want to make that change. Now, what would we do to sustain the city government in that regard if those costs or that transfer went down? That's for absolute public discussion. But the fact is that it's not even transparent right now. I bet you most of you in the room didn't know that we deficit spend at GRU to fund the city government. That ought to be a public discussion. Everyone ought to have input. And we ought to have, as Gary talked about, this idea of a public discussion about that on the budget. You don't even know about it now. It's unacceptable. It's got to stop. When she said stop.
Some of you perhaps have picked up the dynamic of the group of us up here, and this is not my first rodeo, so I'm familiar with both sides of the dynamic. The people who are in office spend a lot of time defending the city and talking about what's underway, and the people who aren't in office and running talk about what's wrong and how it could be better. The GRU mess, and Ed and I have gone into extensive arguments on Facebook about this, so I'm not going to do it here. We just disagree on what part of the problem is with GRU. But one of the things that's accurate is that the transfer, they screwed up the transfer apparently years ago. There used to be a formula, and the formula was in lieu of taxes. And so it didn't interfere. It wasn't profits. It didn't interfere with profits. Profits wasn't even part of the discussion. And it was a normal sort of regular transfer. And then I think in 2008 or something, they started messing with it. I would not vote to sell the utility. When I lived out in Southern California before returning, I used to tell people how great it was that the city owned its own utility, and you could use that as part of coordinated planning with transportation and land use and zoning. And this all came from my activism as a safe energy activist and as an environmentalist, so you could pull the whole thing together and make it all work. The fact now is, if people conserve energy in their home, the revenues going into the utility decrease, which means that the rates have to go up in order to pay for the debt. So it's a perfect lose-lose situation. This budget review that I mentioned is part of the solution. The community-wide discussion is part of the solution. The ARPA money could be part of the solution. The rate stabilization fund could be part of the solution. And certainly the city budget is going to have to be cut, which is why I think we should involve citizens in saying where they think it should be cut.
So once again, there's a whole lot of ground to cover here. No, I would not support selling any part of GRU. It belongs to us. We are its owners. All of us. Everybody is sitting in this room. If you live in the city of Gainesville, you're an owner of GRU. You have a board. That's the city commission. You get to vote on that board. You get to call up the board members of this enormous organization and tell us what you think about things. You get to interview us for the job. That's pretty special. You don't get to do that if you're a Duke customer. I'm pretty sure that FP&L doesn't let their users call them up and give them what for when the rates go up, do they? We do that. That's part of the job. It's part of what we sign up for. Right now, the general fund transfer is lower than it was 10 years ago. I bet you didn't know that. That's just a straight up number. It's the truth. I've also agreed to drop it $2 million a year through 2026. That's going to, or it's 27. I forget what the number is. I don't have it in front of me. But that's contingent upon each commission continuing to agree to do that. That will certainly be my vote. The thing about GRU numbers is you can make them sound all kinds of different ways. And Ed kind of does. And that's okay. And he does. No, you had your moment. You had your moment to talk a little trash. It's cool. You can use all sorts of different ways to think about this. The truth is, it's the lowest it's been in 10 years. And Ed knows that. When we were talking about dropping it to $2 million a year last summer, I believe, Ed said, Commissioner, I think that's a good idea. The idea of using the rate stabilization fund, as I asked our general manager this afternoon, to make up for the high cost of natural gas, is something that Ed told us absolutely not to do a year ago when he was still working for us. Yes, you did.
No. All right. Okay. Keep going. We don't do that.
Gary mentioned earlier that he was the only one of us at that meeting this afternoon. The reason I wasn't there is because I was at work, and I'm actually on a break right now, so I'm going to get up and leave after I answer this question because I got to go back. So if you have any follow-ups, you can come to Madrina's. I'm bar backing. They don't want me to mix the drinks yet. I'm working my way up. I would not vote to sell GRU. I think the issue with GRU as it currently stands, the way that GRU has to take on debt every year to meet the general fund transfer, stems from 2008 when the move was made from a revenue-based model to a flat transfer rate. It was supposed to be a one-time deal to save 150 jobs at the city, and then it was never reversed. The city commission has shown that they must feel some heat for the way that GRU operates, or else they have no interest in ensuring that GRU remains solvent. We're going to have a big issue here if we bankrupt our utility, and I think people don't realize from conversations that I'm having with other people, not just Ed, but other people who work inside of GRU, the state that GRU is in. So we need to incentivize commissioners to have some skin in the game when it comes to GRU. And one of the quickest ways to do that is to look at how we can ease back into the revenue-based transfer. A lot of the other things that have been discussed up here are one-time things. But again, if we do not address the systemic issues, we're just going to end up back in the same mess a few years down the road. And that's just something that the city does over and over because we only have 4-year terms, so it's just someone else's problem, right? We deserve leadership that actually cares about the future of the city after they are no longer involved in leadership. Thank you. Good night.
All right, so we just have, we've gotten some good audience questions, so we're going to do one or two more, and then we'll cut folks loose.
I would like to have one little presentation. if you don't mind.
Okay, so this is another sort of combo question. We're trying to combine some things here. How should Gainesville address climate change? And specifically, how should we protect green space in the face of rampant development? All right, and go ahead and pass it down. We'll have Ed start on this one.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. How should Gainesville address climate change? And specifically, how can we protect green space in the face of rampant development?
Yeah. Yeah, how you affect or how you proceed with climate change is not to give away the affordability factor. GRU and the city have had a history of addressing climate change with the idea that they want to be first in line. They want to be on cutting edge, and it's turned into bleeding edge. So before I left the utility, we took the IRP, which is an integrated resource plan, that is put together by a consultant working with GRU staff and look at the technologies that exist and what you could do over the period of time to get to 2045, what you would implement, how you would implement it, what costs based on what we know today. And we found out that, and this was delivered to the commission, it would cost on the order of $3.6 billion. It would require 700 megawatts of solar panels over 7,500 acres of land in Gainesville. And no, you haven't, the best part is it would require another biomass plant. So, you know, we've been in other forums and the discussion has been, well, we've never talked about it. Well, yeah, the commission's never talked about it. I delivered the report over a year ago and there's been no discussion about it. Yet they tell you all that, sure, we'll do this. Yeah, let's do it. We're going to 100% renewable. As a utility, we're mechanically constrained by the amount of solar that can be handled through our system because we have to have reliability in accordance with NERC standards, which means the only reliable power is fossil fuel power or biomass power. They don't tell you that. Battery powers, lithium battery, does not sustain itself in this hot environment. So battery power storage doesn't work for us. So we have to take opportunities when they present themselves. But this idea that we can chart a plan to do it now without bankrupting the utility, thank you, July, is the real problem. And they're selling you a bill of goods. We can't get ourselves off fossil right now. It would bankrupt the city and the utility. Thank you.
What was the second part of the question?
How do you preserve green space in the face of rampant development?
Right, okay. I'm going to start with that. You preserve green space through land use and zoning policies that, first of all, reverse what's going on now, which is no setbacks for various multi-unit developments. You reverse that. I mean, how do you preserve green space and preserve the aquifer if you're covering the entire ground with concrete buildings or whatever they might be made of? You know, there was no question on the Sierra Club questionnaire about the aquifer. I was stunned. No question about the impact of development on the aquifer. The aquifer is really, that's the starting place. So you begin to preserve the environment, you begin to fight climate change, and you begin to preserve green space by saying this stuff is important and we're going to not let all the development occur. Now, I've made a remark that some people think is facetious, and I don't know for sure whether it's facetious or not, but we've all seen the movie Field of Dreams. So I've just flipped that script a little bit, and I've said if you don't build it, they won't come. There is no obligation on the part of the city of Gainesville to house everyone moving from South Florida just because they live in South Florida and South Florida is going to flood. But all the plans that are being discussed at City Hall now have these projections of by 2040, X thousands more people are going to live here. They won't live here if there's no place for them to move. Now, there's never been a quid pro quo with the county either. So this idea of build up and there'll be no sprawl, well, the county will still sprawl, Archer will still sprawl, Newberry will still sprawl, Alachua, Hawthorne, they'll still sprawl. And meanwhile, we end up with huge buildings. I just read a study recently that shows that high-density, high buildings create more greenhouse gases than any other mixture of that combination. So that's not the answer either. There's a lot more work to do on this, but it starts with saying we want to preserve what we've got, and we don't want to be responsible for everybody who moves here just because they want to live here. I hear Kansas and Wyoming are very nice.
So it's always interesting when somebody who's been here 4 or 5 years says nobody else can move here.
I bought a house here that already existed. I did not buy a new house or build a new house.
We're not arguing
Okay,
with each other.
cool.
I am, when he starts throwing shit at me, and he starts throwing shit at Ed.
You can use your time how you like, and so can he.
So let me tell you, sitting on the dais at City Hall means people aren't always going to agree with you. You got to use your time judiciously. People will disagree. People will argue with you. People will say things you don't like. That's part of the deal. I'm going to try to answer your question. You maintain green space by doing it intentionally. One of the votes I'm most proud of is conserving the Four Creeks Preserve, which was initially 711 acres that was supposed to have been developed. It was real hard to get developed because there was a lot of water there. It's a tough place to build, but by golly, they were going to do it until we figured out a way to get it bought so that my children and their children and their children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, can always enjoy that 700 acres of green space. You do this intentionally. We can set up programs where we work on buying up creek-adjacent property over the years until we don't have to worry about things like flooding and that sort of thing. There are ways to do this by working with the Alachua Conservation Trust and a variety of other ways to intentionally maintain our green space. How are we going to address climate change? We do it by following an iterative path toward that includes the IRP. You can't get a document that says, here's what it costs today to get to 100% renewability and say, and the technology will never change and the cost will never change. This is what it is. When somebody tells you that we're planning on 7,500 acres of solar panels to get to 100% renewability by 2045, they either really don't get the question or they're not being honest with you. Because no, that's not what we're going to do because the tech changes. The tech is different today than it was in 2017 when I first started serving. We have to have a path that gives us opportunities to take the right on-ramp when it becomes available. As the tech changes, we have to be there. But yes, we are committed, and we must get there before 2045 because I think everybody knows that 2045 is way too late. We have to stay on that path, and as mayor, I believe we will.
Thank you. So first, I want to state very clearly that as mayor, I will gladly accept all refugees, including climate refugees. We have already begun to see the first here in Gainesville. As city commissioner, I have fought really hard to put climate change at the forefront of the policies that we pursue. We are right now pursuing science-based targets for carbon emission reduction by 2030. That is going to take into account both what the city of Gainesville produces and also what citizens produce. Obviously, GRU is one of the largest emitters, but so is the average car. So we have to be investing in more bicycle and pedestrian greenways like the Infinity Line and the Sweetwater Greenway Loop, because you do have to intentionally save green spaces. You have to make large investments. We also do have an urban forest master plan, which last I saw, Gainesville is 47% covered by tree canopy. The policy is to not go any lower than that, and every time a tree is cut down to replace it within the city or within the county if possible. So we also have to be transparent about these goals. I want us to have a dashboard that, an open source dashboard that citizens can access and see what are the progress of the different climate policies that we are pursuing, not just in terms of emissions, but in terms of Who's handling it? Who at the city do you call if you're interested in one of these projects? It's super important. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Sierra Club. I'm proud to be a part of the National Climate Action Network, where local elected officials like myself are facing the same issue. This is a generational challenge. We know that we don't have all the technology today that we need to save our planet from climate catastrophe. What we do know is what we need to stop doing, and that is stop burning fossil fuels. We're not talking about another biomass plant, but at the end of this year, we're going to do a lifetime assessment of one of our coal plants that will be retiring, and one of our other coal plants will be retiring soon. The next city commission will decide what is going to replace that energy generation. I'd like to be a part of that. I'd like it to be renewable. Thank you.
All right, so we've got more great questions from folks, but we've been here for a while. I think people are losing patience up front, and you all have been fantastic. You all have been pretty great too. Thank you for being here with us. Yeah, definitely.